Our next speaker is also another senior from UC Berkeley, studying public health and data science. She is the founder of the Period Project, a Berkeley-based nonprofit advocating for free, accessible menstrual products and greater awareness for menstrual health. She's also the co-founder of FlyerStack, which is an app development project collaborating with Skydeck and UC Launch that aims to provide more comprehensive event notifications to resolve FOMO, or fear of missing out. As a female entrepreneur, innovation to her equates to dissolving boundaries and making the world a better place. Although the process is undoubtedly challenging, it is one that breeds resilience and hope. So by sharing her narrative with us today, she hopes to inspire more people, especially women, to embrace the courage and faith to achieve the impossible. Please welcome our next speaker, Allison Lu.
All right, hi everyone. I hope you can all hear me, but thank you so much for having me today. My name is Allison, and like our wonderful introducers said, I am a fourth-year student studying public health data science, and I'm finishing up my undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley. So, what I'm here to talk to you all about today is a story about finding greatness. So, for those of you who don't know me, I am the co-founder and CEO of a startup called FlyerStack. So the founders and I were all graduates of some very highly competitive startup accelerators, including Skydeck and UC Launch. And, the main question I always get is like, what's the story behind your startup? And I'll tell you the story really quickly. So every year on campus, there's this event called Llamas on Memorial Glade. And for those of you who don't know what llamas are, they're basically big, tall, furry creatures. They're very cute. And I really look forward to petting them every year. Well, one year I missed this event by accident, and I was pissed. I was so mad. I decided that I was gonna make a mobile app that notifies you about events, so that way you don't miss them by accident. So that's the story that I tell investors. It's clean, it's short, it's compelling, but the real story of FlyerStack is much more complicated. A startup story really is about the people who make the startup. So I'm going to tell you a story about the people who made FlyerStack. There are 3 people who taught me priceless, valuable lessons when it comes to startup, and I'm hoping to share that with you so you can take it forward into your general ventures, whether that be starting a new organization or a startup or your life in general. The first person I'm going to talk about is named Rachel. So Rachel and I had been friends since our freshman year of college. And during my first year at Berkeley, I decided to found a club called the Period Project. And I remember hosting the very first club meeting. Oh my gosh, I was so nervous. I didn't know if anyone was going to show up. I sat in the room waiting on the day of the first meeting. And as the hour passed, I sat alone and no one showed up. It was really sad, actually. But at the very last moment, Rachel came barging in, saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late. I was running from another meeting." And that's how I met Rachel. She was the only one who showed up that day, and even though she was the only one, she kept saying, "It's gonna be okay, we're gonna figure this out, and we're gonna grow this organization together." And so that's how we grew the Period Project. We grew it to an organization with dozens of members. We donated over 3,000 menstrual products, held a decal even, and eventually we did host a protest that took down the tampon tax in 32 states. And so a year passed, and I got to a point where I was like, oh, I want to try something new. Naturally, I actually turned to Rachel and I asked her, "Do you want to co-found a startup with me?" She immediately agreed, and she said, "Of course. I mean, after all that we've been through at the Period Project, I would love to do that." And so we started out on an idea together. The idea was to make kits that could test for sexually transmitted diseases. I know, very different from FlyerStack, but bear with me. Think of it like pregnancy testing, but for STDs. Well, as the weeks passed, Rachel kept telling me, "Allison, this isn't possible. First of all, we're sophomores in college. We just finished Bio 1B. We don't have the technical skills to make this. And second of all, even if we did, it's going to require so many resources and so much money." So my response was always no, it's gonna be fine, just wait, have faith. And shortly after that, Rachel quit. She said she couldn't see this working, and I thought in my mind, well, she's just a non-believer. I think, there's this common misconception in startup, which is that you have to just 1000% believe in your company, get some investors, and it's all gonna work out. And I was just so caught up in that stubborn mentality. So a few days after she quit, I got an email in my inbox that changed my life forever. I had just gotten accepted into Berkeley Skydeck, a top startup accelerator. And out of 1,600 companies that year, with a 7% acceptance rate, I had somehow magically gotten in. I was like, oh my gosh, it's a sign. And then I got nervous. I didn't know what to tell Rachel. So when I told her the good news, she said she still didn't see this working out. She was like, Allison, no, this is gonna fail. And the whole time I was thinking, oh, she just turned down the opportunity of a lifetime to join me at Skydeck and build something great. I felt betrayed by her. And in all honesty, she must have felt betrayed by me as a leader. Well, guess what? It turns out Rachel was right. I was just in denial. And even at Skydeck, I spent months thrashing around, not knowing where to start, not knowing what to do next. You know, investors and advisors there, they all told me, Allison, this is truly not gonna work. And so I realized that it was not feasible, and I finally let that startup idea go. I think this is an important lesson in startup and in life, which is don't be delusional. You need to check that your ideas are valid first, so do things like market research, fully understand what it's gonna take to build your business. And we see the consequences of being stubborn and delusional today in Silicon Valley, with the story of like Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. So I also tell this story about Rachel, because last year she passed away unexpectedly. I will never have the opportunity to go to her and humbly tell her, I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, you were right. She could have easily changed her mind to go to Skydeck with me, but she stood her ground. She held her beliefs. I think that's one of the most admirable things a person can do, which is to stand up for what you believe in. So that was my first lesson in understanding the value of having teammates, especially ones that disagree with you and challenge you. Their perspective is a priceless gift, especially when it can prevent you from going down a path with delusion and ignorance. The second person I want to talk about today, her name is Carol. She actually gave the speech right before me. She's sitting right there. Hi, Carol. Anyway, after thrashing around at Skydeck for a few months, I realized I needed a new startup idea. So I turned to a different idea, and I started recruiting co-founders. So when I started, I was reaching out to old high school alumni, people I went to high school with. And every single time, their answer was always, oh, you know, I'm busy, but good luck. And so I was just getting a ton of rejections. One day, I got lucky though, and I got in touch with Carol, who, at this point, she was just someone I took pre-calculus with during junior year of high school. So at first she was skeptical, but eventually she began to understand that we could probably build something kind of cool. And so she joined me. At this point, I had little to no confidence in what I was doing, and thankfully I was able to fake just enough to get Carol on the team. But the world of startup was scary, and at Skydeck everyone was much older than me. Like the average age of the founders at Skydeck is around 30 years old. Like they've quit their jobs to do this, they're serious. And I had major doubts about myself. One day, Carol happens to tell me that someone we both know, let's call him Nate, he had joked to her, oh, I see that Allison has managed to pull you into her pyramid scheme. And for those of you who don't know what a pyramid scheme is, it's a very illegitimate business. It's generally frowned upon in society. And so what Nate said really hurt, because I actually asked him to join the team right before I had asked Carol. And he said he was busy, but now I knew what he really thought of me. I thought I was building a legitimate business, and he saw me as trying to build some delusional get-rich-money scheme. So what Carol then said to me next actually stuck with me forever. And that's something that really goes to show that the little things that people say really do make a difference. She said, don't worry, I got actually mad, and I responded, actually this is something I like to do, and I'm glad I'm working with Allison. And in that particular moment, I felt support like I had never before in the world of startup. Someone believed in me, and Carol had stood up for me, even when the startup idea was small and was probably going to fail, and others saw it as silly. So that day, she taught me something in the value of having teammates that are loyal, teammates who stand up for you and join you even when the odds are against you. And in the journey of trying to build a company, you will never stop meeting people who see you as silly or dismiss your ideas. So finding people like Carol are the ones who give you hope and courage to fight for your goals every day. Today, Carol is the co-founder and CTO at FlyerStack. She and I built the app together and we grew the organization to around 19 people, and we actually graduated from UC Launch together last December. So that was pretty cool. Finally, and lastly, the third person I want to talk about, her name is Ashley. I met Ashley in the 7th grade, so that's like middle school, way back in the day. And she and I, from the beginning, were always opposites. She was quiet, she was shy, she was reserved. I was quiet, shy, and reserved, much like an anxious cat. And she, on the other hand, she was loud and hyper, very much like a dog. And I remember that when I met her, at the age of 12, I thought, oh my gosh, my social life is over. She scares everyone around her. If I hang around her, I'll never have friends. Well, guess what? I became best friends with her, and 10 years later, she and I are actually still friends. And in fact, she is currently the 3rd co-founder at FlyerStack. So all throughout high school, Ashley and I did group projects together. If I had to describe my working style, it's chaotic, if I had to describe my working style, it's probably rigid and down to earth and social. And if I had to describe hers, it's chaotic and frantic and passionate. And so it's been an extremely rough journey trying to figure out how our naturally incompatible working styles work together. No matter how many group projects you do, nothing can really prepare you for the sheer amount of teamwork it's going to take to build a startup. So there's so many miscommunications and frustrations, but eventually Ashley and I got it to work. Our skills complement each other's. I do logistics and she does creative work. I read contracts, run meetings, negotiate deals. She is the brand voice and the genius of the creative side of FlyerStack behind its features and its marketing. So Ashley taught me a valuable lesson in working with people who aren't like yourself. If you can't get it to work, then your team is useless and you'll fall apart. But if you can get it to work, your team becomes very powerful. Basically, you need to figure out how to deal with the parts of people that you aren't compatible with if you want to benefit from anything that they're good at. And that means you have to work with others, essentially. That's how you become a strong leader. And that's a very important lesson in leadership that I learned. Over the last 2 years, we've grown FlyerStack to a team of around 19 members. People come and they contribute, but then they have to go because schoolwork happens sometimes, but the team has always had incredible people. Today, I don't have time to thank every person who came by and contributed, but I do say that every person has had a very lasting impact on FlyerStack. Just the other day, someone actually came and told me, one of my team members, he said, Allison, you're doing a great job. I love working for FlyerStack. In fact, I put off my schoolwork to do this a lot of the times because I love it that much. And that one comment made my whole day. It's small moments like that amongst the people on your team that really make you feel like you're a part of something special. It gives a company life and meaning and purpose. So that's why today I chose to tell you a story about people. If I had to give one piece of advice for anyone looking to go into startup, I would say first ask yourself, why are you doing this? Because if you're doing it for money, it's a really bad idea. That's not good. If you're doing it for glory or fame, that's even more delusional than money. The reality is 90% of startups fail. So you're going to have to look for greatness in other places that society doesn't traditionally define greatness to be. After all, I work with startups because I get to work closely with amazing people. And every day that teaches me something new about myself, about who I am as a person and who I am as a leader. Even if FlyerStack were to fail, I don't regret any of this. So if you could look for greatness in small moments, in the people and in the experiences, I promise that the journey would be worth it. Once again, I'm Allison. Thank you so much. I'm the CEO of FlyerStack. Please go download the app. Thank you.
Anyone has a question? Is this wrong? Okay. Anyone? The audience? I actually have a question for you. I'm kind of curious what kind of started you to have the idea of a startup in the first place, because I think that takes so much courage. And especially you mentioned that you started kind of have the idea when you're a sophomore, and as an undergrad, and also maybe sometimes you feel very inexperienced. How do you treat all of this insecurities and kind of overcome that and then have the determination to like go down this path?
That's a really great question. Thank you for that. So to answer the first question, why startup? Well, number one, like I said, I like working with people. But number two, I actually read this quote by Peter Thiel. And if you don't know who that is, he's like one of the big investors in Facebook. And he said something that put my whole life into like perspective. He said a startup at its core is the largest group of people you can convince of a plan to change the world. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I came from a background in activism. I did nonprofit work. I was also Berkeley City Commissioner. And my whole idea was that like I wanted to make the world a better place. And so I didn't really know why I was feeling startup at the time. I applied to Skydeck on a whim. I was like bored and I was looking online and I was like, oh, why don't I apply? And that's how I got in. But then in retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I really like the idea of seeing how much of a change I can make by convincing other people to come along with me for the ride. And that's actually really fun and it makes life meaningful. But how I find the courage, I mean, I don't know, honestly. I don't think anyone has a solid plan for finding the courage to do anything. I think something Rihanna said a long time ago stuck with me, which is like, if you can't find the courage, just fake it. And honestly, like, if you just can't do it, just fake it. No one will know. That's essentially what she said. And I think that's just the only way to go about things, because at the end of the day, it doesn't go away. Like, the feeling that you aren't enough, it's not gonna go away. Sorry to disappoint y'all. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Kind of like, does this add up to your answer? I'm like, okay, maybe that's that one. Never mind. So I'm just curious, like, what made you out of the nonprofit work and made you into the startups? Like, how do you find the differences are, and then how's the working vibe and everything, and what was your experience in those nonprofits?
Yeah, that's really interesting that you asked that, because there's a lot of similarities between nonprofit work and startup work that people don't really understand. Basically, when you are the executive director of a nonprofit, your whole goal is to go out and raise money for your nonprofit. You have to convince other people that your nonprofit's gonna make change, it's gonna work, it's worth people's time, people should join, all sorts of things. And that's very, very similar to pitching a startup, honestly. The difference is that nonprofit money comes from donations, it comes from grants and foundations, and startup money comes from venture capital. So that's where I see the difference being. Of course, one is very money driven and the other is very like philanthropy driven. But at the end of the day, the people who work there, they're under the same drive to generate growth for whatever you're trying to do, so that your mission is best supported out of a lot of other missions. So I've worked with a lot of large nonprofits that actually, like, their executive directors then went on to found their own startups. So it's actually a very similar trend, and I think there's a good intersection. So yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Are there any questions? No? Oh.
Hi, my question is, what are some of your strategies or things you would do to balance your business and your school life, or maybe like personal life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for a long time, I was constantly doing either startup or something else, and I never had a break. And that actually can get really overwhelming. So some like real pieces of advice I would offer, like, make sure your notifications are off by like a certain time at night. Otherwise, you will always respond to them. Like, you'll get a ding from Slack, and you'll be like, oh my gosh, someone needs something, and then it'll be like 3 a.m. and you find yourself doing work. So that's one way to balance your sanity with doing other things. But another thing is kind of like, something I found useful was basically making sure you have a schedule. I know that's something that is pretty obvious, but I actually know a lot of people who don't operate on a schedule. And when I say a schedule, you need to plan your day down to like the minute. Like for the next 15 minutes, I'm going to do something. Someone said use small time wisely. And I realized like the people who make use of like little time, like you're on the bus or you're sitting for 5 minutes waiting for class to start. If you can make use of that time, it all adds up in the end. So those are some very concrete ways, in my opinion, to like balance your time and make sure everything works out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Okay. We have time for one last question. Do you want to just ask right there?
Yes, of course. Yeah, Allison, thank you for your sharing. As I'm considering doing a startup as well, I'm actually doing part of the project that's like startup project, but it's not like part of my major, and it's not my major studying any financial stuff. But while I'm doing something completely opposite than my major that I'm studying. So how do I don't know how to deal with the anxiousness, like if I can't really do this, or can I actually do something and will it work out? How do you deal with those uncertainty, anxious, anxiety in your experience?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So I know people say like, oh, your major doesn't matter for what you do long term. But the issue is that a lot of people will look at you based on your major and start to judge you based off of it. So something I'd recommend you do is when you're doing your market research, go talk to people, especially your customers, who you're trying to target, and figure out what they want. If you can figure out what people in like the financial space want, the experts, the advisors, the customers who would potentially buy from you, and you get to know every little aspect of their life, if an investor ever comes and asks you, like, why would you say your business is necessary? Or if they ask you, why do you think your customers want this? And you have an answer prepared, that immediately is going to set you at like a higher level of credibility than your major ever would. Because people, honestly, sometimes majoring in like CS don't necessarily know what an app needs and what the customers are of the app. So I know it's like hard to say right now, like it might feel like you don't know as much, but if you go and you talk to enough people and get to know their experiences, you should know your customer from like everything from what they eat in the morning to like what they like to do for fun, like what they do at work, who they interact with. If you can answer all those questions and know your customer inside out, you have a large amount of credibility already stacked up with you and your company. So that's what I'd recommend doing.
Thank you, Allison.